Blinking a few times due to the brightness of the place, Claire sighs as she sees the gates open again. She didn't know exactly where she was. She knew she was just at the place as military property. At first she could see some recruits training in the distance. Turning slightly away from the window, she looked at Sherry beside her. The little girl looked excited, but at the same time distant. It was hard to read Sherry. She knew how deep her feelings were within herself very well. In these 2 years, she had changed a lot, but that never changed. Her hair was still tied up in a ponytail, and she had grown a little and showed that she would become a beautiful woman in the future. Up ahead, Chris was driving alongside one of his companions. Clive Bryan or something like that. She didn't even know. She didn't even pay much attention, she admitted. And of course, Chris had forbidden her with this part of organization, as if he was in charge of her. However, she reassured him Chris was a soldier and she wasn't. She didn't want to go to the front of the line and fight that day after against the creatures from the horror movies. She had already seen too much of that for one night and was already going to take care of Sherry. If possible, she would just have to keep those who needed it. Maybe if she followed through the idea of being a doctor. In fact, she hadn't already had an idea of what to do. Sure, as if Chris liked the idea. After some time, Chris pulled into the parking lot, and 4 of them soon got out of the car. Well, Chris, I'm going to set things up. Talk to us the rest of the team. See you soon, Chive said, as he got out of the vehicle and Chris waved, and then turned to the 2 girls and waved. It was nice to meet you both, Claire and Sherry, Chive said, before turning and striding away from there. Claire watched him for a few moments, until she walked around the car and opened the trunk to get her things. That would be her home indefinitely, it seemed. How are you 2 doing? Tired from the trip? Chris asked, his hands in his pockets. He was somewhat conflicted. On one hand, he didn't want to leave the 2 of them alone in their hometown. Not after everything. Not a chance. But on the other hand, leaving them near would only make him like a target for Umbrella. Like it or not, they would have to be known for close to him. Yeah, he was having a nice conflict inside. Not so much. It's just, I don't know, it's just weird, Claire said, picking up her bag while Chris picked up Sherry's. But it's nice, you know, to think that everything's going to be different, Sherry said as Claire smiled mimically. Still the same. This is a place that must be a 5-star hotel, but for now it will do. We won't be staying there long, so hang in there, Chris said as he walked towards the building ahead. Were all those people soldiers under your command? Sherry asked, looking at the soldiers in training. More or less they'll be joining us, Chris said, opening up the door to the large house. As they entered, Claire ran her eyes around the place. It was huge. Despite it being a military training camp, it had a certain beauty to it. The kitchen was to the right and the living room was to the left. In front was a corridor leading to the back. There were only 2 or more doors to the right of the corridor, probably in the other rooms, and stair that went up to the 2nd floor. What caught Claire's attention, and subsequently that of the others beside her, was a man who was sitting on the couch in the living room who was now walking towards them. The man was tall and had short blonde hair, stiff features, and he had a strong body, almost had the same size as Chris. He had a scar on the side of his right arm, a knife in his shelf on his right shoulder, and an arrogant expression on his face. Well, 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 the lost puppy had decided to show his face once again. You took your time, Redfield. 2 days to be exact, the man said. His voice was deep and slightly drawn out, and as well as approached, Claire could see that he had blue eyes. He sure was handsome, very masculine way, but there was something about him that she hadn't already liked. It seemed like he had bad intentions in almost every action he took. Look, Krauser, everything seems to be so good before you showed up. So what do you want now? Chris said, the slightest of his eyebrows somewhat annoyed. The usual, I'm here on business. I can't stand to look at your face more than 5 seconds, Krauser replied, and soon his rigid eyes focused on Sherry, to ultimately focus on Claire, whose gaze lingered longer. What's this? I could say that you're married, but the girl is clearly not yours. New girlfriend? Is that what you've been doing? Krauser asked, somewhat annoyed. Perhaps. Nah, There was probably a mockery underneath. "Ah, you're as dumb as you look. It's none of your business, and she's my sister," Chris replied, probably a bitter taste in his mouth. "Sister? Ha! Who would have thought? She looks nothing like you," Krauser said, staring at Claire once again. The woman in turn felt somewhat uncomfortable. She hadn't liked that look. "Well, it seems like things are going to get more interesting here than I thought. I might as well like staying around here," Krauser said with the clear motives, much to the jargon of Claire, especially Chris. "And I'm gonna love smashing your face in every time you don't think to look at her," Chris said, clenched teeth, moving a few steps closer to Krauser, who just smiled and mocked Dorchberry. Claire then pulled Sherry back slightly, and the girl wasn't scared. She was just confused as to why they were fighting. She had thought about breaking up the fight, but she knew that Chris wouldn't listen. And honestly, she didn't want to. "Oh, come on, Chris, I'm about to break your face too, but we already know the outcome of that," Krauser said in angerance. "Yeah, your cold body in the grave," Chris replied, and just before the two men could exchange the punches right there, footsteps were heard coming down the stairs, and Claire couldn't help but smile as she saw Jill approaching. "Chris, you've barely arrived and you're starting already picking a fight?" she scolded, causing the two to look back away as she approached. "And so are you, Krauser. You're here on a job, not to fight." She gave him a frown, and she just shrugged. "Ah, sweetie, fighting is part of the job," he said, causing Jill to roll her eyes and sigh. She then turned to Claire with a cracked smile. "Hey, girl. Wow, I missed you," she said as she approached, hugging Claire, who had returned the hug. "Me too, but it was nice to know that you were keeping my brother in line," she said, undoing her hug after a few moments. "I do my best," Jill replied, before looking at Sherry. "Oh, that's Sherry. She's prettier in person," Jill said, and Sherry in response smiled slightly. "Thank you," she thanked her, and Jill held out her hand. "I'm Jill Valentine." Sherry squeezed her hand. "Sherry Redfield," the girl said, and Jill, after taking her hand, arched an eyebrow at Chris, who had just shrugged. If you're done with some scene, come on. We've got work to do and you're already late," Krauser said, arms crossed and propped up beside one of the doors of the corridors. "What exactly are you doing here?" Chris asked again. "You're dumber than a bag of rocks, Redfield. I already told you. Susasco is dumb enough to trust you, and you're a parade of little soldiers, and here I am as a representative. Now come on, if it were up to me, I would have already given you up on this idea just for delay," Krauser said, still with his arms crossed. "Is that so? Why are you still here?" Chris said. "Well, I wanted to get to the root of it all, show my superiors that trusting a guy who almost lost every man on 4 different missions is not the best decision they had." Krauser of that, with the same tone of Dewberry. "And now, how many men you've lost, huh, Jack? I've been as least successful in all my missions," Chris retorted. "I admit that we were not prepared for the mass attack by lickers, but if that's been informed beforehand, I have no doubt we would have done better than you," Krauser said, and without realizing it, Claire held her breath. She knew what Chris did and what she thought of it, and the missions went on a dangerous high risk of involving biological weapons. Chris has always had concerns for her safety, but she was also concerned for his safety. She was totally against him going out of that kind of mission, doing what he does, even though he knew that she never said it out loud. Just remembering those things, she wanted to get to the end, for no one else could go through what she went through, especially what Sherry went through. Is there any way you guys can stop wanting to kill each other for at least 10 minutes? Chris showed them their room and come downstairs. "I'll set things up with the others, and we'll start the meeting in 15 minutes. "Good to see you again, Claire and Sherry. Excuse me," Jill said, not allowing any room for any response from Chris or Krauser, and just walked out of the house. "Finally, someone with balls around here. Ironic," Krauser said, causing Chris to roll his eyes. "Shut up," he said, not wanting to go through with it anymore and starting up the steps of the stairs. Sherry and Claire followed right behind him. As they reached the 2nd floor, Claire ran her eyes around the office to the left, visible at the 2 glass doors. To the right of the bedroom was a double bed ahead, and another bedroom, this one with the door closed. Chris opened the bedroom door, revealing a single bed with a small steps to the right with the closet near to the wall to the left. In the right corner of the room, another single bed with a bedside table with 2 beds, a lamp on the beside table, in front next to the 2 with the wall, and a table with a chair and a TV in the corner facing the 2 beds. Next to the table, a door that led to the bathroom. "Cozy," Claire murmured, being overheard by Sherry, but giving no response. "Well, we'll make yourselves comfortable. Like I said, this is going to be temporarily. Don't bother with Krauser. He won't be staying long," Chris said, placing Sherry's bag on the ground between 2 beds. "You seem to have a problem with him," Claire said, and Chris snorted. "Oh, that's just an understatement. Krauser is a good soldier, but I'm sure that's just about it. He's arrogant, debauched, annoying. Let's just say he had a problem with me the moment he saw me. But that's my business. You don't have to worry about him," Chris said, walking to the door. "Well, if you need anything, call me in a few hours and you could talk to Parker. He's probably supervising the training of recruits, but it'll be over soon. I have to go. The sooner we finish this meeting, the better," Chris said, looking at them for a few moments before turning around. "Chris, wait!" Sherry stopped him, and she looked at her with an arched eyebrow. "When are we going to start my training?" she asked. Claire smiled slightly sideways. Some time ago, Chris had decided that it would be a best idea to train Sherry the same way he had trained her years ago. She was supportive of the idea, and it would be good to keep her skills up to date. One never knows. Anytime I'm available. We'll see. In the meantime, Claire can start teaching you the basics," Chris said, and Claire arched both eyebrows slightly and alternated their gaze between the 2, who were staring at her. Yes, I could use a little practice myself," she said, and Sherry smiled slightly. With that, Chris just nodded and turned away. Claire then closed the door and turned to Sherry, who was opening one of the doors to the near beds. "So, do you want to go shower first?" she asked. Sherry nodded in response, walking towards her bag shortly thereafter. As the little girl headed for the bathroom, Claire grabbed the TV remote and started flipping through the channels. She liked the sound of the TV, although she rarely paid any attention to what was going on. But it was good training. She could do better control, attributes so to speak. It was still strange. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it didn't. But she was better than before, at least. Those years had done her some good, sort of. With a slight sigh, she sat up in bed and switched the channels, until one caught her eye. The sound of water falling down to the bathroom was drowned out by the sound of the news report playing as Claire turned up the volume. The man was on the screen. Neil Fisher was just written below. He was talking about how the bioterrorist attacks were expanding and how this was a risk to the whole world. Images of destruction caused by such attacks flashed on the screen. This caused Claire's attention, but this was because she was still thinking about it so much. She didn't want to fight on front of the lines. She wanted to help the victims just as the man did. She had been determined this for some time. Now not that all that's left was to tell Chris that she wanted to be part of TerraSave.